Welcome to the Mystical Truths Podcast. This is Rebecca, and I'm really glad you're here. Let's unlock your world. Linda walked into my office, deathly pale, on portable oxygen, and holding a thin gold cross against her forehead. She said it was the only thing keeping her from being completely taken over by the many entities that were possessing her. You know, and although what I'm about to share with you may sound extreme and maybe even frightening, it is a true story. I changed the names, but about 16 years ago, I got a call from a colleague who said that 2 local healers had contacted her to see if she knew of anyone that could help one of their clients who was dealing with extreme possession. They had exhausted all of their efforts. It was getting worse, and now it was out of control. So she quickly called me and explained and asked if I would be willing to see the woman as soon as possible. She said, "This is really urgent." And I said, "Absolutely, I can see her tomorrow, but it'll have to be in the evening." And she said, "You'll meet with her at night? It'll be dark." And I chuckled and I said, "Yeah, we'll be fine." Because, dark doesn't equal scary. It reminded me of a quote from Vinton's The Adventures of Mark Twain. It was a claymation movie from when my kids were younger. And, Mark Twain had a solid trust in well-being. And he said to Becky Thatcher, like following a hallway at home in the dark, if you feel some fear, you know no harm can come, because you've traveled that hallway many times with nothing but bare feet and faith. So I knew that a trust in Source was all that I needed. The next evening, Linda and her partner Tony arrived in complete desperation. Linda was exhausted, frail, terrified. Tony looked desperate and exhausted too. It was obvious that they were at the end of their ropes. So I invited them both in, and as we sat to talk, I thought, I need to know if she's really ready for the help that she's asking for. I can help her, but I need to know if she's ready. The conversation was slow, pretty slow moving for sure. It was really difficult for Linda to complete a sentence because the drama inside her would take over and distract her. She's still holding that cross to her forehead this whole time. And she would say, see, they're pulling strings up the back of my neck. Or they're interrupting me. There's so many of them. Now some are coming in through my eye. Wait a minute, hold on, wait a minute. And she'd go in and sort of be conversing or addressing some of them. She was so hyper-focused on her inner drama that it was really hard for her to conduct anything near close to a normal life. I patiently waited, and I encouraged her to focus on our conversation instead. At one point, she said to me, "I'm an intelligent woman. This is really happening to me." And Tony, who was a medical professional, said, I can't take her to a psychiatrist or any form of doctor. They'll commit her. And I said, if you're experiencing this, then it's real. It's real to you, and that's what matters. And then shortly after that, it happened. As we talked, without realizing it, Linda set the cross down on the table in front of her and kept talking. I didn't bring attention to it. I just smiled and sighed, really, and kept going. And I thought, she's ready. That was progress. Because keep in mind, that cross to her was the last thing that was keeping her from being completely taken over, that was keeping her in her body, that was keeping her in touch with the reality here. And as we talked, she just laid it down on the table. Didn't even realize she did it. So we met twice a week, and I really wanted to record our sessions or take notes because I thought, this definitely could help anyone deal with a loss of personal power, because that's exactly what she was going through. But it really needed my complete attention. I had to really be focused and be fully present with her because everything that she was going through was just so intense. And before our visits, Her experiences were so extreme that it took over their daily lives for her, for Tony, and their young daughter. It was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, over-the-top experience of taping her eyes so that they couldn't get through, adjusting the lights, untwisting her body from the contortions that she said they put her through. Wall hangings had to be moved. Mirrors had to be adjusted. It was just nonstop. It was always something. And while preparing for this episode, I asked Tony to share a comment just to give you an idea of what it was really like in their daily lives. And she said, that was a terrible, awful time. It consumed her completely. Every second she was busy trying to please the dark spirits instead of what was happening right around her. So one by one, we addressed each experience to help her regain her personal power. That was the adjustment. That was the shift in perception that needed to happen. And I want to say here that in my experience, it's not possession like most people think. Physical life here is only about allowing. There's no insertion. So none of it, like anything else in life, was happening to her. It was happening because of her and what she was giving her attention to. Now, that doesn't put blame on her. This is just life. That's always the case. Years before that, a friend of mine who is a psychologist called me, and she said a friend of hers who's a psychologist had a patient who insisted that she was being controlled by hauntings in her home and some kind of energies in her home. And the therapist did what she could. I mean, she just didn't know. She said, it sounds like this is really happening. So she called her friend who called me, and she asked me, can you come and get them out of her house? What can you do? Can you help some way? And I said, you really don't need me. Either of you can do this. Help her regain her relationship with her personal power, with her sense of being worthy, with her sense of being powerful enough to not put up with that, to not allow that. Get her attention focused in a different direction, even little by little, and that stuff will go away. So in Linda's case, she had gone so deeply into powerlessness that everybody's lives around her was involved in that. It revolved around that. And she had a progressive lung condition that required oxygen, but she was functional and she was a contributing parent. But as she slowly focused more and more on what was happening in her body, at some point that sort of also opened the doorway for all the possession stuff, and I'll explain more about that in a little bit. So not only did that internal drama begin, it eventually spiraled out of control. She felt that they had gained control over her, and she just had to comply. I don't believe we have anything to fear. And I certainly don't believe that anything can overtake us without our invitation somehow. It could be conscious, but more often it's unconscious. It's the unknowing. We unknowingly reel it in, even though we don't want it. But it is serving us somehow. It's helping us learn and grow and expand, if we'll see that. And if we also will recognize that there is never anything to fear. There are things that we can say that looked frightening, and it must have been terrible for them to experience. But it doesn't have to be. So can there be things that you could get afraid of in this life? Of course. But that's a place of powerlessness. It doesn't have to be that way, at least not for long. So how did Linda unknowingly open herself to all of this extreme stuff? Remember those well-meaning healers that I mentioned? She initially went to them for help with her lung condition. They invited her to their metaphysical group meetings. She'd been curious and interested in things like that, so she attended, which would have been fine, except that the meetings were fear-based. They talked about protection from forces. doomsday kind of stuff, which was just a recipe for disaster in her case. Because the more she talked about it, the more she heard, the more she focused, because she was already focusing on her health condition way more than was necessary. So now the more she internalized all of that and listened and believed, the more real that became. And of course, whatever we really believe, we're going to have some experience of, because we're that free. And this is a world of complete variety, complete contrast. It's all here. You can experience any of it. Just because nothing will break you as a soul, but we certainly can make it very rough on ourselves, even out of ignorance. So as this continued, and she's having these entity experiences now, in her words, possession, there came a point at which she said she felt that they, or aliens or something, planted a chip in her, like in her forehead, like a computer chip of sorts. So she went to the healers, hoping that they could help. I think at that point, they pretty much felt not sure what to do. And maybe out of the goodness of their hearts, they thought, well, we'll just get some kind of a chip and show it to her. Because Tony said they did. They did this procedure on her, and then they showed this chip and said, here it is, we have it, you're good. And when she saw it, her head filled with them. So at that point, they were backed into a corner, didn't know what to do, and called somebody who called somebody. So what actually happened there was they meant to maybe show this to her, thinking, okay, if we just show it to her, she'll have proof that it's gone and we'll be good. But what that actually did was made it more real. It backfired because this is how life works. She believed there was a chip there, but once she saw it and they validated it, well, then there had to be more. There had to be more trouble, because now that's proof I'm powerless. This stuff can happen to me. And I love metaphysical, spiritual stuff, of course I do. However, like many other belief systems, there are regurgitated untruths in there. Less today because we're doing more research, we're validating things in a positive way. We're understanding what energy is now. We're understanding the power of our thoughts and all of that. So we've got the research to show us that there really isn't anything to be afraid of, and that we do create our reality. And therefore we have the power to create it in a different way if we choose to. So it's not as crazy as it was in the past, as far as all the untruths that are just being told over and over and over and blindly believed by people. People today are asking questions. I always did. Show me. What do you mean? I can't just believe that because somebody said and somebody says and somebody said for years. That doesn't really validate it to me. But even though it's less, it still remains. So I'm not 100% in on probably anything, really, as far as, definitely as far as religion goes. Metaphysics, not 100% in. Spiritual stuff, well, that's a mixed bag. I mean, there's so much there today. I just look for what feels true to me and what we can figure out in a sense. What we can really just prove to ourselves. Because, a lot of this stuff, like a near-death experience, you can't really prove that necessarily to anybody else, at least maybe not at this point. But once you've had an experience, it's much easier to believe, right? But if any belief system is teaching powerlessness or fear, it's crap. It's false. Walk away. Because anyone who has truly sought source or has had a true spiritual experience knows unconditional love is the basis of everything. It's the bottom line. It's who we are. Love, unconditional love, in ways that we have not words to describe. So what I taught Linda was to find her power and her self-love. Because like in my last episode, your most important relationship is with yourself before you can really even recognize one with Source or anyone else for that matter. Not truly, anyway. And after about 2 months of us meeting, Tony said, if it never gets better than this, thank you. There was a remarkable change in Linda. She was speaking full sentences. She was much more present, or what we would call normal. And when we got down to the last one, she said, it's the big one. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, you know. And I said, Satan? And she said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, okay, go inside yourself and give that one a big hug. And she said, I can't do that. She was so scared. I said, yes, you can. Let's do this together. I said, hold my hands and embrace it. And she said when she did, she found that energy, that thing that was the biggest, most frightening one. And she said when she went in for the hug, it transformed into a bright white light and then just dissipated. Of course, right? She felt the love from that. She felt free. She had her power back. Mostly. And I say mostly because she had it back in a tremendous way. But I don't think she ever really fully had it back, and maybe none of us do. Some months later, she broke her ankle and started over-focusing on physical problems, and a little bit of the possession stuff returned. We handled it. She did great. And over several years, as her lung condition progressed, she would occasionally regress into a lack of personal power because she was so over-focused on what was happening to her body physically and its decline. But she never went back to that extreme state. She did, however, remain stubbornly focused on her physical body, way more attentive to what was not working than what was working and what could get better. That's okay. That's why we're here, to expand and to grow more and to unravel some stuff. So the point to Linda's story here is that what you give your attention to matters a lot. What you believe matters a lot. Because what you're giving your attention to, like you've heard me say before, what you believe, what you talk about, what you focus on, becomes more. More like it becomes more. It's like a domino effect that in some cases can turn into a real shit show when it's in the negative. But when you're focused on feeling good things and more what is working kind of stuff, then you get a whole different, better version. Because your personal power is always what you say it is. So if you believe that you have the power to choose thoughts that feel better to you, or the power to say no, if you believe you have the power to find solutions, or to allow solutions to come to you, then that's going to be your life. Likewise, if you believe that you don't really have the power to stop life from happening to you in ways that don't feel good, right? If you believe that things can just be inserted into your life, stuff can just happen out of nowhere, and it can be bad, and it can be traumatic, then you're going to have some version of that. And again, like you've probably heard me say before, it's really helpful to learn to look at the things that we label as bad or things we don't like as opportunities to find some honey and to expand and grow and get on with it instead of digging deeper into it and making it worse. We are very powerful creators. So in the early part of 2022, Linda left her physical experience. It was perfect and very interesting to watch the coming together of. Her body was shutting down. She began having dreams that confused her, but they were actually helping her to prepare for a transition. The doctors said there was nothing else they could do for her. Tony and their now young adult daughter, Mia, were more than spent. From the hospital trips, the doctor's visits, the just 24-hour-a-day challenges of her increasing condition. They loved her so much, but they were mentally, physically overwhelmed. Everything was in its place. The grand orchestration of the transition process was obvious. There was time there for me to guide all three of them through this big change, and in perfect timing, Linda withdrew from her physical body, and Tony and Mia started the next chapter of their lives. They have the power to go on. And the soul that was Linda lets them know in smaller ways than they would like that she's around, but she's still much a part of their lives. Things have changed, but that's always a good thing. And we shouldn't feel powerless about that either. So, the primary focus of this podcast is to help you and me navigate life. You may not be dealing with the kind of extreme manifestations that Linda had, but have you lost your sense of personal power in some area of your life? Could you use some help with the stuff that's dogging you? If so, keep listening, or you can reach out to me. Don't let money or time or intimidation or anything like that get in your way. I'm here. I got you. And I wish you all the best. There's nothing to be afraid of. You can find me at mysticaltruths.com.